Okay, I think we are ready for our next presentation, which is a panel. Peter, do you want to come up and introduce everybody? We'll start with this, and then we'll see how we go.
We'll work some magic. Don't worry. Where's the rest of the crew here that's going to be on? Come on up. There's Joe. Yep. James. We'll sit up here. We're kind of lazy. All right. I guess we can just pass the mic around.
Yeah.
Okay, that'll work. Whatever seems to work. But thank you so much, Jim, and everyone here at Rail Passenger Association. I'm Peter LeCody. I'm president of Texas Rail Advocates. And before Meredith, and we're gonna switch over again. Okay, very good, very good. One of your former chairs of Rail Passenger Association. Pleased to have you here in Texas, and got a real interesting conversation going. We're going to kind of keep it serious and light at the same time. So we're gonna have a little fun while we talk serious things about rail. And I want to go ahead and introduce our three speakers, or three panelists on our presentation. First of all is James Bass, who's right here. Raise your hand. There we go. Before joining the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority, James worked at TxDOT for over 30 years and served as executive director of TxDOT for 5 years and chief financial officer for 10 years prior to that. You actually began your career with TxDOT working part-time, summer hire, back in the Fort Worth district back in 1985, and worked part-time in the TxDOT Austin district while earning bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Texas. Anybody from UT here? Any UT folks? Okay, there you go. Hey, hook 'em horns. Okay, good. So you were actually around when the rail division gave birth there at TxDOT, or TxDOT gave birth to the rail division back in 2009. It's amazing that, you've got rail divisions in states all around the country that have been around for over a century. Well, here in Texas, we were a little slow, but we got there finally in 2009. James serves as executive director of the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority since 2021 and is responsible for managing, directing, and implementing the agency's policy, projects, programs, budgets, and operating strategies. Also, buried somewhere in the language for RMAs is something to do with a 4-letter word called rail, I believe. Okay, good. Over to my left here is a former Flatonia councilman and mayor, Dennis Geesaman. You can call him Goose. There you go. Recently volunteered to serve without pay for a brief stint as a city manager at Flatonia. And he's a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel and pilot, graduated from the U.S. Air Force Academy with an engineering degree, and served 21 years in the Air Force and completed his military career commanding an F-15 Eagle squadron in Okinawa, and earned his MBA while on active duty. And then he spent 22 years flying for Southwest Airlines, and you're also running a cattle and hay operation, restored a historic hotel with his wife. Yeah, and you have a little time on your hands? Active in making Flatonia an Amtrak stop on the Sunset Limited route between San Antonio and Houston, which actually is basically the halfway point between Houston and San Antonio. And you've got a lot of territory in there that's very underserved for public transportation. So Flatonia is at the crossroads of 2 Union Pacific lines, and a major transfer point there for a lot of freight trains. So I know you've attended a lot of our tempo meetings in the past, and also the Southwest Rail Conference, as has James, and also has Joe in the past too. And now you're in 2022 redistricting. It put Fayette County in District 85, and now it's given you the opportunity to run in the upcoming Republican primary for the district seat. So State House, exactly. And on to my right here is Joe Black, Senior Vice President and Lead for Rail Operations and Service Planning at WSP USA, and the firm's national transit and rail business builds a variety of transportation projects, bus rapid transit, light rail, streetcars, high-speed rail, and subways. And Joe, you've had a lot of experience all around the U.S. and overseas. New Jersey's transit access to the region's core, which is the Amtrak Gateway project now. The New York MTA East Side Access, Southern California Regional Rail Authority Positive Train Control Program, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit's Silver Line, and formerly Deputy Director of the Lone Star Rail Regional Project in Central Texas. And also, not too long ago, you were appointed to serve on the Surface Transportation Board's Passenger Rail Advisory Committee. So, yes, and Jim Matthews as well. Very good. And we appreciate all of you being here today. Like I said, we're going to be a little serious, but we're also going to be a little on the cavalier side as well. And the first thing I want to do is kind of ask, well, let's see, which regional or intercity passenger rail service have you traveled on that really opened up your eyes to the possibilities of having rail? And if you could go anywhere around the world, where would you want to go to ride an experiential train? So Dennis, I'm going to kick that off with you.
Okay, so I've actually lived in Europe and done all the Eurail pass and traveled on trains over there. I've lived in the Far East and ridden on the Shinkansen and trains in mainland China, Korea, and light rail in Singapore. And I think where it actually opened my eyes, though, is I was actually born in Amish country in Pennsylvania, right in Harrisburg area, and used to take the Amtrak train from Harrisburg into Philadelphia. And I've got the nieces and nephews that have all went to Temple University and routinely rode that back and forth between Harrisburg and Philly. So I've been an advocate for passenger rail, but I've seen it from the worldwide perspective, and as a mayor and a councilman and started economic development. We ran a small historic hotel. My wife, who's also a veteran, and seeing the value that it would have. It's interesting, when we first started advocating for passenger rail in small town rural Texas, a lot of the folks there still remembered the passenger rail there. But now that we've advocated for this for probably 20 years now, and there is some progress with the corridors identification and the Amtrak plans, but those folks have mostly passed on, and it's a whole different generation now. And I see there was a dead spot in there, but I see the rejuvenated interest and people that see the value of having an alternative to building 6, 8, and 10 lanes on the interstate.
Joe, what opened your eyes, and where would you want to be on that special train?
So I'm originally from Philadelphia. I've ridden the Harrisburg train, the Keystone service. Great service. I grew up riding what was first Reading Railroad, and then Conrail, and then SEPTA, the regional rail system. I used to take it to college, as a matter of fact. Every day I would take 2 trains, transfer in Center City, and head out to Villanova, where I went to school. You know, especially urban rail services like commuter rail create so much opportunity for employment. I mean, a city like Philadelphia couldn't survive without the SEPTA regional rail system. There's not enough space for highway lanes. There's certainly not enough space to start paving over things in Center City, Philadelphia for parking. And so without that economic engine for the entire region there would not be possible. In terms of an experiential trip, I haven't gone yet. It's a bucket list thing, but I do plan one of these days to fly to Toronto and take the Via Rail Canadian all the way across the country to Vancouver. And then maybe I'll come back on the train, or maybe I'll just fly home. I'm not sure, but yeah, really good to be here. Thanks, Peter, for the invitation. Good to see everybody.
So for me, I grew up in Fort Worth, and I can recall going to visit my grandparents who lived in Gainesville, which is near the Oklahoma border, just off of I-35. I think, and I don't know if you'd call it commuter rail or intercity passenger rail, but visiting New York City area 30 years ago, the Long Island Railroad, right? And much like you're saying, Philadelphia, there is no way that Manhattan could even function, without all of the options available to everybody to get to and from work, to and from entertainment, to and from education, whatever. Just wouldn't be able to function. Dream trip, the Texas Triangle. Love to ride on that someday. Another one I'm fortunate to ride on the Channel, which was or in the Channel, I guess, which was an experience. And then I'd also love to do the high speed from Beijing to Hong Kong.
All right. Good trips coming up there. All right, so let's get a little bit serious here, and let's talk about Texas, because we've had our ups, we've had our downs, but Texas is a big state. Everything is big in Texas. Where's Steve Mewson? Where are you? Okay, you're from Rhode Island. Okay, when you look on a map of Texas between Dallas and say San Antonio, it only looks like it's this far. Okay, but how far is it? We're talking about hundreds of miles, not like Providence to say Boston, which is about that far on your map too, I suppose. There you go. So everything's bigger in Texas. Takes us a little bit longer to get around in the state. So maps can be a little bit deceiving. What else is big in Texas? We got big teams. We got the Dallas Cowboys that so far for 30 years haven't been able to buy to win a Super Bowl again. We're big on boots. How many boot stores did you pass here walking around in San Antonio? Huh? 2, 3, 4, 5, half a dozen? Okay. Big hair. Remember back in the 80s, the show Dallas? And we had these big hair on a lot of our gals there from the J.R. Ewing show. We probably have some of the biggest potholes in the state too, if you're traveling on some of the highways. Not your fault there, James. You're off of TxDOT now as executive director, so we don't have to worry about that. Big possibilities. If you read just a few days ago, U.S. DOT Secretary Sean Duffy has announced $5 billion that's going to be available for intercity passenger rail projects. And we would sure love to get a little chunk of that money here in Texas. Those applications for the grant program are going to be due by January 7th. And, we also have a lot of big dreams here too. We talk about high-speed rail, and this has been kind of a hot and cold situation here in the state of Texas with Texas Central. Everybody thought they were dead and buried, but they're still kind of plodding along. I had a conversation with their folks about a month ago, and they are still working very diligently in trying to get high-speed rail established between Dallas and Houston, with the North Central Texas Council of Governments adding on a link between Dallas and Fort Worth. So we do have a lot of big obstacles that we have, but we'd also like to see conventional rail too, Amtrak type service, and maybe up to 90, 10, 100, 110 miles an hour, which according to our state could be funded under state law. Now, if you go over 110, the legislature passed a bill a few sessions ago that said, no money for anything over 110. But if we could do, if it's operated by private, that is correct. Yeah, but will we? We don't know yet. That's true. Thank you, sir. So we've also had some other big obstacles. We almost lost the Heartland Flyer this past year. And unfortunately, TxDOT did put in extra money for it. They had an exceptional item to help shore up the Heartland Flyer because for the past decade or so, they've only contributed $2.5 million a year to match Oklahoma and the money that Oklahoma puts in to fund the Flyer. So the extra exceptional item would have brought you back up to inflationary levels and have given us, some good chances here. Unfortunately, Senate Finance decided to kill everything, and it was just thankfully from the North Central Texas Council of Governments And then through the Texas Transportation Commission, they've been able to find the money to take us into the next year. And we're going to probably have to go and kind of grovel again next spring. But hopefully in the 2027 session, we can get some sort of policy and possibly some kind of legislation in to make this permanent. So a lot of these we're going to talk about, a lot of issues here. But the first thing I want to kind of ask our panelists here, and Dennis, let me start with you. Are we really ready in Texas to give our pickup trucks and to get on trains? 10, 20 years ago, you talk about rail here in Texas and people would go, oh, hell no, forget about it. And, you get doors slammed on your face. Then we got to the point where, well, maybe we ought to start thinking about it. Our roads are getting a tad crowded. And is this a time now where it's yes instead of a maybe? And what do you see at your level? What do you see at the public level? What do you see talking to other folks in government about this? And where do you think we stand right now?
I've seen it from a bit of a different perspective, living in rural Texas, being in government in small town Texas. But I'd like to play off of what Jesse and the SARTS guys said, go for the low hanging fruit and bring it home. There's so much that can be done with that. What I've seen, and I know and love the rural Texans, they're just naturally conservative. They're just naturally common sense. And if we start reaching for the star, the bright shiny object, it just turns folks off. There's a lot of the high-speed rail just involves eminent domain. It involves some all-new infrastructure. People just say it doesn't make sense. I mean, we got a monument to that out in the Bay to LA project of how it doesn't work. So I just like to emphasize there's places where there's infrastructure already in place. There's places where there's already some service that can be expanded. Go for the low-hanging fruit and bring it home.
So I've been in Texas for, 15 years now. So I kind of think of myself as a Texan. I like pickup trucks, but we have definitely experienced, say, over the last 10 to 12 years, a real demographic shift in Texas. And I'm not talking blue state versus red state. I think Texas is always going to be a red state. But many of the people who are coming here, and we've got some of the fastest growing cities in the country. I think San Marcos was #1 a few years back in terms of the growth rates. Those folks are coming from places that have really good, mature rail transit, commuter rail, and intercity rail services. And it's kind of an expectation when they get here. During my time at the Lone Star District and having some conversations with people about that, they were shocked. They were frankly shocked that there wasn't better mass transit options, congestion-proof options anywhere really in the state. Amtrak, Austin has kind of made this attempt with the red line. We're talking Project Connect now, which is light rail. But in general, the folks that are moving here, they're coming from the coasts, and the coasts generally have really good rail transit and commuter rail and every kind of rail, streetcar, all that stuff. And it's really an expectation. So I think the answer is yes, that there are definitely, I think we're reaching a critical mass of people who would be more than willing to leave the pickup truck. I don't think they'll ever give it up, but they'll leave it home and take a train instead.
So Peter, you mentioned everything's bigger in Texas. I'll also mention that there's big industry interest in Texas as well, and they tend to spend a lot of time in the capital. But I do think it is changing. I think younger generations, new people coming into Texas are very open to it. When I was at TxDOT, we had a commissioner or somebody who would say, well, 92% of Texans choose to drive a single occupant vehicle into work every day. And we would privately, I might say, I'm not sure they're really choosing to. They don't have a choice, right? And choosing suggests that you have a choice. And so one of the things is, in order to have alternatives, right? They have to exist and people have to have access to them and be reliable going forward for people to give up that freedom and flexibility of, leaving work whenever they want. Well, I don't want to wait 2 hours for the next train. I got to have some reliable time on it. The other one, and I certainly get the low hanging fruit, and maybe it's, incrementally move in, but I would suggest at some point there's going to be eminent domain. You're going to need to have your own rail, because if you choose to operate on UP, you're always going to be a second class citizen, and your customers are going to be sitting on sidings waiting for the freight to go by, and you lose reliability for travel time, and people aren't going to sign up for that, because in today's world, time is a commodity. And if it's going to take me that much longer, or if it's uncertain how long it's going to take me, depending upon how routine that is, I think you're going to have a challenge with ridership.
All right, James, let me kick it back to you with a question here. Looking at the needs for transportation options in your region. Now, basically, it's toll roads, it's highways, and that's it. You've got some buses, and they use the toll roads and they use the highways, but we really don't have anything else. How fast, because your RMA, your Regional Mobility Authority, is probably one of the fastest growing in the country. I don't know the exact statistics. I know Texas is like the, the 8th or 9th largest economy in the world. That's how big Texas is. But the Austin area, the Austin region is just exploding. So what are the needs for transportation options that you see? What are people coming to you and asking for? What type of options would they like?
So one, I'll start off with, we are a regional mobility authority. We're probably known for toll roads, but no, we are not a regional toll authority. We're a mobility authority, and there's different versions in the state. Dallas-Fort Worth, North Texas Tollway Authority. Houston has a Harris County Toll Road Authority. We are a mobility authority that was created by the legislature early 2000s, back when the funding picture was very different at TxDOT. But as you mentioned, we can do toll roads, we can operate rail, we can operate transit, we can operate an airport, we can operate a ferry. Don't know where it would go, but we could do that. We could operate international bridge crossings, and so it's a statewide statute, right? We're not going to do any international bridge crossings in Austin, but I think that the idea at the time, again, 2001, 2003 time, was, okay, the state and, CFO forecast was like, there's going to be no money to expand the highways. There's barely going to be enough money to maintain what we got. So there was an idea of, okay, well, let's set up the regions of the state to be able to maybe have a revenue generating source, right? And I think that was the first thought, was toll roads. And maybe 20, 25 years down the road, they have enough money to cover operations and maintenance and pay off the debt service. And then maybe there's a surplus that they could put into other modes of transportation and kind of, make those decisions regionally. We're still just on toll roads. We haven't expanded. I think we are in conversations with Judge Andy Brown, who's the Travis County judge. He is very interested in Austin, San Antonio. We have authority that not a lot of other people have. And so we're interested in working with him, to see if some of our powers, if maybe we can flex some muscles that haven't been flexed before, and start to look at and study rail going forward. But I think, what is needed in Austin, and I'll wrap up here in a second. Sorry. If you go back to like the mid 80s, there was a saying in Austin, if we don't build it, they won't come. So they tried that and they didn't build it, and they still came anyway. And they're still coming today. And there's still groups that don't want anything built built, what have you, right? And, you know, I think decades ago, maybe highways, maybe they did, you know, help advance sprawl or go to places then development happened. I think it's kind of pivoted now. Most of the highways now are responding to demand and sprawl development that's already there. People, you know, they live where they can afford. They don't necessarily choose where they live. They live where they can afford, and then they still have needs to get in and out. And so
Drive till you qualify.
yes, drive till you qualify. In the but whether it's, you know, traditional transit, bus service or rail, I think in Austin and really throughout Texas, we need everything, right? We need all options on the table and not one, you know, that's more favored than the others. Just really to be able to look at it and hopefully look at it at a level playing field, which we don't currently have, because our Department of Transportation, the majority of its funding is restricted by the state constitution to only go towards highways. And that's why rail division wasn't created till 2009. Sorry for the long answer.
Dennis, let me hop over to you here. You're in a totally different sphere. You're in rural Texas, between Austin or excuse me, between San Antonio and Houston. So your needs are a little bit different there, and transportation options may be totally different from what we're going to see in the Austin area. So what are your needs there in rural Texas? I know you have some affiliation with an organization called CARTS. Maybe you can explain that a little bit. And I know that you're really anxious to get Amtrak service there in Flatonia for the whole multi-county area that you serve. What happens when that train pulls in? Are they just going to get off and hitch a ride or what?
Again, a rural stops. I look at it more like a small airport where folks come in to get on the train and folks get off with plans to either visit locally or in the area, whatever the catch area is. Right now, we have about 40,000 vehicles pass through Flatonia on I-10 because Flatonia covers I-10 just for a bit there. So. And we also have Union Pacific goes right through the middle of town and used to stop in Flatonia. So the issues we have are mostly dealing with the Class 1 carriers. And I remember I listened to every bit of the negotiations with STB and Amtrak and the Class 1 carriers when they were trying to negotiate the transportation, extending Amtrak over to Mobile. And that was really interesting. The cases where the government and Amtrak had some leverage, like there was a pending merger, things happened like a grease pig. It just moved right through. In the cases where there was no leverage available, it's negotiation one-on-one. I understand the business model. They throw every roadblock possible to stop to stop it, and in exorbitant amounts for improved track service just to have one more train come through per day. So it's an entirely different thing. There's always going to be restrictions with the Class 1 carrier, and I go way out of my wheelhouse here. But I remember listening to those conversations at the time, and at the time, CEO Gardner, he came in and he made the point that okay, when all rail passenger service was turned over to Amtrak, it didn't leave 100% of track ownership to the Class 1 carriers. I thought, well, that's an interesting argument. I'm not a lawyer, and I didn't stay in the Holiday Inn last night, but that may be an interesting point of leverage in the future.
Joe, I think you might have been a little frustrated. You served as deputy director for the Lone Star Rail District from, I guess, the date of inception 2010, 2017. Yeah. What was the most frustrating thing having to deal with that? And then all of a sudden it just kind of evaporated. Kind of maybe run us through a little bit of history on that. And do you have any good suggestions on the future on what we can, I'm sure you have got plenty of ideas. Okay.
Oh, thanks, Peter. Yeah, the Lone Star Rail project was ambitious, right? Unlike what SART is proposing, it was a very ambitious project. One of the biggest frustrations, oddly enough, besides dealing with Union Pacific, and I, I say that, but Union Pacific was actually actually a very good partner for about 10 years. We had an MOU with them. We went to Omaha regularly. We do planning up there. In the end, what really made the project evaporate was two main factors. One of them being money, and the other one being politics, and specifically not enough money or no money, and hostile politics that kind of came into the equation. But the biggest frustration was trying to get a NEPA environmental effort done to create this new service. And the way that the service was designed was it was to meet all needs in the corridor, right? So it was both intercity rail. There was express trains that were programmed between Austin and San Antonio. Some of them would stop in San Marcos. And then there was commuter service, which would kind of be centered on the two big downtowns. And actually in the Austin area, it went further north than that, went up to Round Rock and Georgetown. It was so hard to get the US DOT to figure out who our lead agency was. Because if you know anything about the business, commuter rail, the money for commuter rail comes from Federal Transit Administration, right? It comes from grant programs from Federal Transit. So there's commuter. Intercity passenger rail is the responsibility of the Federal Railroad Administration. And both commuter and intercity rail are regulated from a safety standpoint by the FRA. And so we went round and round and round and round with the FTA going, oh, it's an FRA project, and FRA going, no, it's an FTA project. Probably years, I would say, wasted on that effort. And you know what the secretary finally did? Said, you guys, out of the room. Your lead agency is the Federal Highways Administration, right? which terrified the FHWA guys in Austin, right? Because they were like, rail, what? But that delay was really one of the nails in the coffin. And in terms of recommendations, there's a few things I will say. And I appreciate, Dennis, you bringing up the Class 1 railroads, because I don't want us to gloss over this. Guys from SART, I applaud you and Restart Lone Star Rail District in the Austin area for your vision and for your enthusiasm. Union Pacific is a private company that answers to shareholders. And failure to acknowledge that right up front means that you're destined to fail. One of the reasons why the Lone Star project actually made it as far as it did, probably about 40 to 50% through the NEPA process, was because one of the earliest things that the district did was create a relationship with Union Pacific, a good working relationship. That has to not only be before the project, it has to be through the project, and it has to be after the project is delivered. So that's one thing. Second thing is lack of political champion. Especially in a state like Texas, you need a political champion for these large infrastructure projects. And the Lone Star Rail District just didn't have any. Lots of enthusiastic people who wanted to see it happen, but nobody who stepped out and kind of took that leap and said, I'm going to champion this at the legislature, at the U.S. Congress, locally. There was nobody who stepped up and did that. And we didn't have the power to do that. Of course, we were, a public agency. So we can only advocate, quote unquote, so much. And the other thing was, honestly, some of our frustration was, some of y'all if you're from Texas may know this, but back in 2005, that the voters of Texas, not even the legislature, the voters of Texas created what's called the Texas Rail Relocation and Improvement Fund. So you might have heard the federal RIF program, which is a loan program. This was not intended to be a loan program. This was intended to be a pot of money which could be used to leverage federal funds. And it was somewhat prescient because nobody knew back then the bipartisan infrastructure law would have this favorable, incredibly favorable federal funding match, up to 90%. to get intercity passenger rail projects done. But you need that 10% local match or 20% local match, and that's what this fund would have provided. It's created, it exists. There has never been a single penny put into that fund since 2005. That would be, especially in the current funding environment, that would be the best way to move this thing forward, because I wouldn't even recommend going back and talking to Union Pacific until you have a financial plan in place that's viable, that's real, and that, you know, people can kick around and you know, have some kind of realistic goal in mind of, as to where we're going to go. So those are the things I think that need to happen. Don't forget the freight railroad, right? Again, love what you guys are doing. Don't think you're just going to run trains, even a single train. You're not going to do that. You have to negotiate with UP, and you have to have money. And the organization that Jim there in the back of the room and I are part of, the Surface Transportation Board's passenger rail, and John Robert, who is also in the back, we're part of a thing at the STB called the Passenger Rail Advisory Committee, and we're working on some of these issues right now. It's a very, I think it's the first time in the history of the industry, and I'm sorry I'm taking a little bit long, but I think it's interesting. It's the first time in the history of our industry that we've had this group of people sit together in one room. So there's passenger rail, there's commuter rail, there are states that sponsor Amtrak service, there are states that don't sponsor but have Amtrak service, 2 freight railroads are there, rail labor organizations, shippers, and the Railway Supply Institute, in addition to Class 2 and Class 3 representation. So never in the history of railroading in the United States has this group gotten together. And I think we're making some good progress. Jim can back me up, and John Robert can back me up on that. I think, you know, we're making some good progress. We just formed some task forces that are going to address some of the biggest challenges and hurdles to getting this done. And we're doing it at a level where we have the support of the Surface Transportation Board. We have 2 co-chairmen. One of them is the CEO of Metro, the commuter rail system in Chicago. The other is Henry Posner, who is Iowa Interstate Railroad. And just a great bunch of people, very smart people, and good things are happening. Do with that what you will. But, you know, as the funding environment seems to kind of constrict a little bit, we're focused on trying to find better ways to deliver passenger rail projects across the country.
Thank you. That's great. As we move along here, kind of want to talk a little bit about funding, because that's the elephant in the room. How in the world are we going to fund any sort of passenger rail project here in Texas? And I just wondered if you all have some ideas on this. Any kind of wild thoughts?
So I have a few wild thoughts, and thanks for the memories of the Rail Relocation and Improvement Fund. But that fund, it was modeled after mobility. The line is the legislature would dedicate revenues to the fund. TxDOT could then go issue bonds and then pay the bonds off over time with those dedicated revenues. And one of the great things is it's all backed by the full faith and credit of the state. So out of the box, it's AA, right? The mobility fund can be used on passenger rail and other public transportation and highways. Most of it's been spent on highways. The commission for like the convention center stop in Austin, can't remember if that was 20 or 50 million. Denton County, 200 million for rail cars. El Paso, that old historic trolley car, blah, blah. They got a lot of pushback, and they haven't gone back and done it since. A wild idea, I think, might be the state's rainy day fund. It's getting ready to cap out in the next couple of years at $28 billion balance. It would have a hurdle, because if anybody use some of that 28 billion, it has to pass by 2/3 vote. But I'll let you on a little bit of insight. If you can be patient, the legislature is focused on the next 2 years, on the next 2-year budget cycle, 2-year budget cycle. And if you go and ask for growth money, that's not going to show up until year 3. Like, oh yeah, you can get that. Yeah, well, and that's what happened for this Texas Mobility Fund. It was staged in over time because the focus of the legislature is very much on that next 2-year budget. And if you look for growth in revenues beyond that, not saying it's 100% successful, but it's far greater than asking for money. You know, I need money this September 1. Well, can you take money September 1, 3 years from now? Your odds are much better. And so I don't know, you know, how the rainy day fund would be a high hurdle, and it would be state investing in it. I think the question would then be how's it going to operate? Who's going to cover the operation cost? Another idea is kind of like the transit oriented development, right? And so ending from people with now as far as the White Line in Florida, the operator owns both stations. And it was a part of it was a real estate development as much as transportation, right? Maybe some of the revenue they get from operating those stations at the end and all of the other, whether it's hotels or entertainment, what have you, can go in to help subsidize the operation of the rail. Because if I'm operating an entertainment district or a hotel, I got to have people. How do I get people to it? Well, the rail can get them there. And I think that's may also be this, you know, value capture, whatever, may be similar to how I think Japan may help fund some of their, so that would be another possibility.
Peter, if I could just kind of tag on to that. I spoke about it a minute ago, but you know, one of the, I think it might be a once in a lifetime opportunity with the bipartisan infrastructure law. The federal funding match again on step 2 of the corridor identification and development program, which is for planning new rail corridors and improved rail corridors, is 90-10. The feds will pay 90%. You only have to come up. It's a low bar, intentionally low. To get into step 3, that's PE, preliminary engineering, and NEPA, environmental studies. That's funded at 80% federal match, unprecedented in the history of this country in terms of transportation funding. So there's a real opportunity there. And Peter, you mentioned the NOFO for Fed-State Partnership National, which just came out. Fed-State Partnership was supposed to be fed by Corridor ID, right? Corridor ID was supposed to be the pipeline to get into Fed-State Partnership. Unfortunately, out of the 69 corridors that FRA selected for Corridor ID grants, only 5 of them are actually in step 2, which is the service development plan. So they all still have at least one more step to go. The other 64 are still way back in step 1. So there's no pipeline of projects for FSP. But the opportunity there is because the feds recognize that there's no pipeline. They've kind of expanded the definition of what you can do under Fed-State Partnership. And there's even the ability to do some planning and other work to get projects, quote unquote, shovel. Remember shovel ready from PREA 2009, right? There was no shovel ready. It's a way to get projects to that point, get them through PE and NEPA, get them ready for final design. And then, you know, the Fed-State Partnership Program, again, funds at 80%. Final design and construction. So it's there. If we had some money at the state level, or even locally, regionally, that money can leverage, that can bring down a lot of federal funding. But it takes a political champion, and it takes some commitment at the state level and also at the regional level.
Yeah, we definitely need to start looking for some coins in the cushions there to get that 10% and 20%, but that could probably be doable. I believe TxDOT does have a little planning money here and there that can be maneuvered around, hopefully, but we'll have to wait and see. Dennis, now, since you're in Flatonia, how are you going to be able to fund your station? And as trains start to run between, you've got the corridor identification program that's in progress, and I believe it's still in step 1, but that has been completed and sent to the FRA from TxDOT, and I think they're waiting for the okay to go to step 2. If 6 to 8 week review, yeah, minimum probably.
That's each go around.
For I know. It's endless. It's an endless cycle. But how are you going to go ahead and fund your station and from the corridor identification grant program, say that develops into the service plan and then into construction and operation? How are we going to be able to fund that whole system?
Well, so far we've indirectly gone to TxDOT through CARTS, Capital Area Rural Transportation, and they've basically agreed and gone through this level 2 planning and shovel ready planning to build a carts depot, which is designed to would also function as a train depot in Flatonia. And they've also talked about even funding a platform, but we can't go that level until we get approval for some sort of a straight ahead stop there. So there is funding available outside of trying to tax the small population in Flatonia. There is funding available, but I also have to throw some water representing rural kind of conservative common sense Texans. I can look at the state budget, and if from what we had before the 88th legislature and what we had coming out of the 89th legislature, you can say the budget there has increased 40%, and that doesn't sell well. So that's why my thought process is looking at alternate funding mechanisms, like working with other agencies like CARTS, and just focusing on doing it as economically as possible. Go for the low-hanging fruit again.
All right. Well, I guess we should leave open a couple of minutes for some conversation here if you have any questions. But one thing I want to do here is I want to make it a little bit lighter here toward the end. And I want you three to kind of think of a name or some sort of brand. If we do develop, I shouldn't say when we develop passenger rail corridor service here in Texas, what would you want to call it? So what's the name that you would want to pick this service? Now I'm going to throw out one call it the Texas Tornado, but maybe that's a little bit too strong for Texas. So Dennis, what would you want to call that train service that runs through Flatonia?
I kind of look at it as a broad brush of transportation intermodal options. Just call it Texas Mobility.
I'm pretty partial to Lone Star Rail. I don't think you're going to do too much better than that, especially in comparison to what the district was called before they rebranded as Lone Star Rail. It was called the Austin San Antonio Intermunicipal Commuter Rail District, which too long, right, to go on the side of a train. And also, when you kind of sound it out, it looks like ass crud. So it was not. Lone Star was probably the best thing that we could have done, but maybe Tex Connect or Texas Connect or something like that, maybe. But like I said, I don't think the district has rights, has exclusive rights to Lone Star, right? It's the Lone Star State, so reuse it.
I think at least one person will agree with me in the room, the Longhorn Express. Right. All right. Blue. And for those in the state and those outside probably know, there are very few things that Texans love more than Texas. And so Lone Star, people love it, right? They love the star, they love the flag. I don't think you can really name it the flag, but Bluebonnet Express. We have cattle trails, historic cattle trails, and I think Chisholm Trail roughly was San Antonio to Fort Worth. Maybe something like that, harking to the past. Metrolink, maybe connected. But anyway, there's a few ideas brought to you by ChatGPT.
Okay, Jim, I guess we have a couple of minutes for Couple of questions?
Okay, I'm going to pass along a tech tip before I hand this to you. This little bottom part is the transmitter. So if you hold it, don't do that. You want to get it up like this and away from your mouth. And I'm told that will make this a little bit better.
My protege here from Bill Steverson and I are from Tennessee, and we share something with Texas, which is not particularly enviable. And I'm not sure who's number one and number two, but in terms of rural healthcare facilities, rural hospital closings in the last several years, we are number one and number two. The Rail Passengers Association, in particular, Jim, have told us that as our scope for phase two for our corridor from Atlanta to Chattanooga to Nashville to Memphis, that we should focus and emphasize rural advantages. I haven't heard much from you guys about rural service or helping people get to healthcare facilities. Can you address that?
Dennis, how would that affect your region if you had rail service?
That is probably the number one thing I've heard from folks getting into appointments at MD Anderson or going to San Antonio for appointments. So right now, for example, Flatonia is the exact midpoint between San Antonio and Houston. There's no stops on the Sunset Limited or any future corridor. There's no stops right now. So there's a need for that catch area to be able to go in, whether it's shopping. But the number one thing I hear is for medical appointments.
Yeah, I'll tag on to that real quick. I think rural service only works when you have good connections from the station to destinations and from home to the station, right? So the primary challenge with getting rural service to be effective is it's the classic rail transit conundrum, right? We even have a name for it, the last mile, right? How do you get to your destination? If I get to the train station and my doctor's appointment is 3 miles away, how do I get there? And so, yeah, Uber for the most part. So what does that mean? It means you have to design your stations specifically to allow for those type of easy transfers. Rural areas are usually not well served by transit. There are organizations like CARTS that does a great job. But in those places where it's just not, the coverage is not dense enough, then I think rideshare might be the best option at this point. But you have to design your system and your stations that way right from the start. It can't be an add-on later on.
Oh, I do want to recognize Christina Anderson. Christina, where are you? There you are. Yeah, you've had a good project going on in East Texas trying to get veterans to Dallas on the Texas Eagle, if I recall. Yeah. Your Go Bus, yes. Good job.
Good morning. Brett Weber here from All Aboard Lehigh Valley in Easton, Pennsylvania. And I got a question for Joe. I had the great fortune of getting to visit Switzerland last year and riding Swiss Rail. But one of the interesting things is that I was in Zurich and then in a little town of Brunnen on the Lake Luzern. And there it was a really interesting example of how high speed, so you have local regional rail, you have high speed, high end rail traveling with freight through local sort of regional small towns. And WSP has all this global expertise. What do Americans need to understand, especially rail advocates, about how to influence? Obviously, the freight industry is very different in the United States than it is in Europe, but there is this sort of there are wonderful examples of how freight is moving effectively managed with high speed and other high-end passenger rail services through towns like that. Just wondering what expertise you can bring to share with us.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds. People start to go to sleep, but when you have such wide speed differences between trains, you can't design an effective train control system, signal system that can handle both. So you really need separate tracks. And for high speed especially, you really need to have a sealed corridor. You can't You don't want people, dogs, animals being able to access that, because at 220 miles an hour, it's obviously a disaster for the person, but it can also be a disaster for the train. So one of the hurdles is, one of the most precious pieces of real estate, I think, probably in the world, is a linear right-of-way, a connected linear right-of-way. So hard to put that together, especially if you're doing like a new greenfield alignment. And so the challenge is really identifying those areas where we can expand the tracks. And if it's a high-speed train operating next to a freight railroad, you're going to have big distances between the track centers, and you're most likely going to have huge crash walls between them at the freight railroad's insistence. So in the end, it's money. That's the biggest hurdle, I think, to getting something like that. Europe, as you pointed out, it does have the advantage, some people would say disadvantage, but advantage of having government-owned rail networks, right? Where the government basically says, hey, it's a public good. We need to have commuter and high speed. We need all that stuff out there. We don't have that in the United States and in any place except the Northeast Corridor, which is a great example of high-speed freight commuter service.
I'm going to try and do this in order. Mitch.
Awesome. I'm Mitch Radakovich from Cincinnati, Ohio, with All Aboard Ohio. You were talking through the two big problems, no money and hostile politics. I'm curious if you have any examples of where you were able to convert somebody who had been hostile on the political side. I mean, obviously, you were successful enough with the project going for so long.
Yeah, perfect example. Just up the road from here, a little town called Schertz, Texas. The mayor, and I forget the gentleman's name, the mayor was a kind of a really strong, staunch Tea Party Republican, reduced the size of the government, stop spending our damn taxpayers' money and stuff like that. We went to him a few times, both in public and city council meetings and also in private. And I remember what our vice board chair, a guy named some of you may know him if you're from Texas, a guy named Tullis Wells. He's the general counsel for the San Antonio Spurs. He was our vice chairman. And I remember one thing that he said to him one day. He said, look, here's the choices. We can build a station in your town and give you connectivity to Austin and San Antonio and give you an anchor for development, maybe even a second downtown. Or we can build another strip of concrete on 35 and let people drive through at 70. That's really the choice, right, in the end. That didn't convince him. So there's a book, and I always forget the gentleman's name, but it was a conservative think tank, Free Congress Foundation. Jim, you might know. Do you know who I'm talking about? Paul Weyrich. He makes a conservative case for passenger rail. We got him a copy of that book, and within a month, he was out speaking, advocating for the project, not only in his own city, but in other cities up and down. So you gotta have the facts, right? You gotta have the data and the facts to back you up. And you're not going to find a better place for that than Rail Passenger Association and Jim's team, the work that they've done to kind of identify all the benefits that accrue to passenger rail. But you got to come in armed with that. You can't just come in and say, hey, we want to run some trains and put a station in your town. They'll next. So.
And you also have to find champions too. And that's the most important thing. We're not ready to really make a formal announcement yet, but at Texas Rail Advocates, we've been working real hard trying to emulate what happened in the state of Kansas with their Rail Caucus. And we are now forming a Rail Caucus group here in Texas. We have one Democrat from the House of Representatives, one Republican from the House of Representatives that want to see passenger rail service on the I-35 corridor. So there's a Dear Colleague letter that's being formulated. It's going to be passed around in the next couple months, and then hopefully we're going to start signing up their peers for that and moving forward toward the 2027 session.
Okay, so we're going to do Chris, and then John will have the last question.
Hi, Chris Nadelback from New York. I came down on the Eagle, and of course, at the Dallas and Fort Worth stations, I was actually impressed. Even though I live in New York City, we have a lot. what is the difference? I'm going to ask a general question. What's the general difference why the Dallas-Fort Worth area was able to build what I think are very good light rail lines and the train that goes from Fort Worth Central into DFW? How come that got built and the rest of Texas, like San Antonio, it's not built yet? So I was just wondering what the panel thinks about that.
James, you've had a little bit of conversation with folks up in North Texas when you were at TxDOT.
And I also grew up in Fort Worth, where famously in the 40s and 50s, Amon Carter, the mayor of Fort Worth, would take his lunch with him when he went to Dallas because he didn't want to help the Dallas economy. So, and I think, well, how did that change? I think Dallas Fort Worth Airport forced them to work together. And this may sound silly, and maybe it is. I think the Cowboys, the Rangers, it gave them something to agree on and root for, and tribalism can be persuasive. I think the 30 miles difference between them, the proximity, but also I think Michael Morris, who's the head of the Metropolitan Planning Organization up there. He's been there, since before day one, right? I think, but probably like 30 years. He's influential and gets it. People trust him, and I think he was probably a big reason why that happened and got considered.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Michael Morris. The other thing is that there was a concerted effort on the part of the region, probably at least partially led by Mr. Morris and DART, to actually go out and buy up freight lines that were not in regular use, right? And they went and they banked them. So they had all of this right of way. Again, linear right of way, so precious, so hard to put together. If you already have it and you can acquire it, even if you're not ready to build, you can bank it and then use that later on. And that's really how the DART light rail system was built. It's on old freight railroad rights of way.
Okay, so we are actually at time. So I'm going to go ahead and call this to a close. But gentlemen, thank you so very, very much. It's great to see everybody up there. And we are in our first break.